Unsightly envy. I didn't realize that you and Lord Ashenbert were acquainted, Lydia. Lydia had returned from the rose garden, and now Lucinda was standing in her way, smiling brightly. Well, I suppose we are. Then the estate you worked at before must have had connections with him. Is that when he made you his mistress? Mistress? While the very implication made Lydia blush, Lucinda seemed utterly unconcerned. I suppose you must have lost your employment over it, poor thing. While it seems rather common for gentlemen to fool around with a servant or two, a servant defiled in such a manner will never find true respect again no matter where she is employed. That wasn't the nature of our relationship. Oh, there isn't any need to hide it. I shan't be telling my dear aunt anything. It seemed that Lucinda wasn't yet aware that the Countess was missing. Presumably, Constable had been keeping it from her to avoid causing any undue anxiety. Her promise to keep quiet about Lydia's supposed circumstances suggested that she was scheming something, and indeed, she smiled as she sidled up to the fairy doctor. She then started to whisper like she was sharing a secret. My dear father refuses to grant his permission for Lord Ashenbert to marry me. It seems his lordship has caused offence by sending correspondence to me behind my father's back. And then there is the matter of his proposing without permission too. Edgar, at least, had done nothing of the sort. Now father refuses to speak to him. He even said that he would not sit down to supper when his lordship is present. And I cannot depend on my dear aunt's assistance when she is bedridden. How unfortunate. Lydia, I was wondering whether you might explain to father that his lordship really is head over heels for me. I beg your pardon. I don't expect you to recite a script. Just say whatever comes to mind. Hearing it from a third party might work well to change his perspective. Lucinda was under the impression that she held an inconvenient secret of Lydia's, while also seeing her as a rival for Edgar's affections. As such, she was attempting to use the fairy doctor to secure her relationship with the Earl. She was hoping that this would drive a wedge between them. And why shouldn't it, when Edgar's interest in Lydia was shallow to begin with? The fairy doctor fell silent. Naturally, she felt rather indignant at being considered her fiancé's mistress. Would this have happened had Lucinda not thought her a maid? How long was she expected to keep pretending? Unfortunately, the fact remained that Lady Ortred was missing. If Lydia stopped the act without permission, she risked missing out on the Countess's backing and disappointing Edgar as a result. Quite apart from anything else, she wanted to rescue Virginia, and she was curious about Lady Ortred's whereabouts. In any case, she couldn't just up and leave as long as there were fairies involved in the entire mess. At the same time, she wasn't keen on being bossed around by Lucinda either. He said he had no room in his heart for anyone other than me, Lydia said, utterly thoughtlessly. Those words of Edgar's were all she presently had to rely on. It was less about her trust in them and more about the fact that if she didn't cling to them, she would only end up wrapped around Lucinda's little finger. The dark-haired girl's face turned red with rage. Raising a hand, she struck Lydia across the face. You are a maid. Know your place. A nobleman's daughter was as much a human as any other girl. It was that expression, twisted with rage, that made Lydia think so even as she reeled from the shock. With that, Lucinda turned and stalked away with her silent maid in tow. Just as Lydia was leaving the scene, she heard a voice from the top of the stairs. Are you all right, Miss Carlton? A dark-skinned boy was watching her. Did you witness all of that, Raven? Not all of it. I was only just passing by. Raven wasn't the type to lie about such things. However, he would have seen Lucinda hit Lydia. His lordship is searching for you. He wishes to speak with you. I am not leaving this estate. Lydia started walking away. Raven followed her. The dangerous party might still be loitering. There is a high chance that somebody will be putting on an innocent act only to turn and attack at a moment's notice. The attacker might just as well have been an intruder from the outside, in which case they will be long gone. None of the dark-haired girls in the estate gave any cause for suspicion. Lady Lucinda has dark hair. Raven, what reason would a girl have to attack her own aunt? While Lydia recalled that Lucinda had mentioned wanting to borrow the Countess's regard necklace, it didn't suffice as a motive for theft. They have been estranged on account of her father and aunt's strained relationship. There may be hidden discord that we as outsiders are not privy to. You too should feel free to return to London if it frightens you so. His lordship is frightened only of the possibility that you should come to harm. This was clearly Raven's heartfelt opinion. Although Lydia couldn't deny that she was pleased by Edgar's concern, her cheek was still stinging where Lucinda had struck it. She didn't blame him for what had happened, but there remained a lingering uneasiness. As far as Lucinda was concerned, Lydia would never measure up to her, no matter how hard she tried. Even without the pretense that she was a maid, it would be difficult for the fairy doctor to mix with the upper class as she was now, let alone marry an earl. I am not leaving the estate, Lydia repeated after a pause. Then at the very least, would you consider abstaining from working as a maid and being open about the fact that you are Lord Ashenbert's fiancée? Perhaps that would stop Lucinda from pursuing him. However, Lady Ortred might take it as a sign that Lydia had rejected her education. She theorized that working hard to get to grips with the duties she was so unused to would serve her well in coping with whatever unexpected troubles noble life might throw at her. That may well have been what Lady Ortred was testing her for too. I cannot do that as long as her ladyship is absent. Please do not be so stubborn. His lordship cannot keep an eye on you unless you stay by his side. Incensed, Lydia stopped in her tracks. Stubborn, was she? This is what Edgar wanted, isn't it? Shouldn't he be happy that I am receiving Lady Ortred's education so that I might prove a suitable countess? Or would he rather I gave up all on some whim of his? Lydia stalked off again at pace, but Raven would not be left behind. He followed and, when he was in reach, grabbed her by the arm. Unhand me. No. I ask that you come with me. I have work to do. Oi. What do you think you're doing? Billy had emerged from the courtyard. Though Raven turned to face him, he kept a grip on Lydia's arm. You don't work at this estate. Who are you? I serve Lord Ashenbert. I see. A philanderer serving another philanderer. I'm afraid I can't allow you to seduce one of our maids. He isn't. He is an acquaintance of mine, Billy, Lydia said. Come. Raven tried to escort her away, only for the other man to grab him by the shoulder. The boy spun around at once. His iron grip found Billy's arm and pulled it up. Raven, stop. Lydia cried, frightened the footman would have his arm broken. But Billy fought back, striking upward with his knee. Raven evaded it by darting around his back. The footman swiveled round and the pair stared each other down, both ready to attack again. The tension lasted for some time until it was broken by the arrival of the housekeeper. I've been looking for you, Lydia. What are you doing out here? We've no time to rest. Ah, forgive me, Mrs. Boyle. The fairy doctor glanced at Raven and whispered to him, Please, Raven. Do not tell Edgar every little detail about what I am up to. With that, she hurried away after the housekeeper. He made no move to follow her this time. When Lucinda had warned Lydia to know her place, she hadn't intended for that to be the last of it. Following the day of their altercation, the fairy doctor found herself ignored by the other servants, who were also speaking ill of her behind her back. It seemed that Lucinda had told everyone that she had been fired from her previous estate for having an improper relationship. The housekeeper had immediately questioned her about it. Though Lydia had denied everything, Mrs. Boyle hadn't seemed to believe her. I haven't got the authority to dismiss a maid, so I'll have to keep you employed until her ladyship returns. But I'm not going to tolerate any behavior that brings the repute of this estate into question. The housekeeper's firm tone made it clear that were it up to her, Lydia would have been forced out at once. She'd had no choice but to nod obediently. It appeared that Lady Ortred had told Mrs. Boyle nothing more about her than that she was a new maid, and Lydia had no recourse as long as that remained the case. As frustrating as it was, at least it gave her the chance to search for the Countess and dispel these misunderstandings. As for the gossip, she simply needed to ignore it. The rumors, however, were not discussed exclusively behind her back. It only took a small group of maids forming for the topic to come up, whether or not Lydia was in earshot. I heard she approached one of her mistress's visitors at her previous estate. Goodness me, how shameless. I bet she'll try the same thing here. She might have already started. On her ladyship's brother, do you think? Probably with that young nobleman. He was asking me about her, you know. Of all the times for Edgar to interfere. But I heard he was engaged to Lady Lucinda. And yet she's trying to tempt him away. What's she trying to pull? For once, Lydia was relieved to be called away for work. It didn't last, however, as it transpired that she was to be assisting Lucinda. For reasons unbeknownst to Lydia, all of the noble girl's requests were being assigned to her. In fact, it was because she had fewer duties now that Lady Ortred was missing. As Lydia crossed the courtyard to go to Lucinda's room, she felt a single drop of water fall onto her hair. Rain. She looked up, but the sky was clear and pale blue. Suddenly, a strong scent of perfume hit her, making her furrow her brow. Someone must have just tossed it out of a window. Though unpleasant, Lydia didn't have the time to wash herself. She arrived at Lucinda's room, only to receive a glare from Mrs. Boyle. You were responsible for making Lady Lucinda's bed, weren't you? Yes, madam. Then how do you explain this? The sheets were covered in dirt and mud. I'm not sure. No one else has been in this room except for you. In that case, it was obviously Lucinda herself who had done it. Lydia looked at Lucinda, who was predictably feigning ignorance. You will tell the truth, Lydia, the housekeeper said. Please do not be too hard on her, Mrs. Boyle, Lucinda chipped in. I am sure she is just a little envious that I am to marry Lord Ashenbert. She seems to have a certain fondness for him, in spite of her station. I did not do this. Lydia could scream, but she held it in, knowing that an outburst was just what Lucinda was hoping for. The other girl approached her, smiling. Oh, is that perfume I smell? Why, I believe that's my perfume. What? Lydia, did you use Lady Lucinda's fragrance? Boyle pressed her. I did not, she stammered. It is as though she wishes to be me, exclaimed Lucinda. Lydia could think of little worse. Exasperated, she took a deep breath, which was when her eyes happened to meet those of Lucinda's maid. The latter looked away in a manner that Lydia found rather suspicious. Studying the maid's nails, the fairy doctor noted that there was dirt on them. Lucinda must have ordered her to do this. But she couldn't humor the idea of pointing it out even for a second. If she brought attention to Annie's nails, Lucinda would immediately pin all of the blame on her own maid. Annie's inability to speak would leave her unable to defend herself. I am satisfied, Mrs. Boyle. I shall have someone else clean up my bed, Lucinda said suddenly, apparently having noted that Lydia was studying her maid's hands. It seemed she was keen to end things there. The housekeeper gestured for Lydia to leave, and she did so in silence. Lydia came to a fountain in the gardens, where she took a seat on a stone wall and let down her hair. She started rinsing the ends in the running water, eager to rid it of the perfume's cloying stench. The sound of the fountain intertwined with the giggling of the fairies that were frolicking among the foliage. Lydia often spotted fae in these gardens. The Danes, however, were more elusive. She had hoped that she would be able to eavesdrop on their conversations to learn their secret, but she had yet to find success. Though she walked the gardens whenever she had a break in her work, if she did manage to spot the Danes, they would immediately hide from her. Goodness, am I hungry, she murmured with a sigh. There had been an insect in her porridge that morning. Although she knew it had been placed there by someone out of spite, she hadn't been allowed a fresh serving. She scanned the nearby trees, but it was too early for them to have any fruit. She did, however, spot Nico plodding toward her on his back legs. I think you're out of luck, Lydia. There's no chance you'll learn the Danes' secret in time. They don't even let other fairies anywhere near them. They're desperate to protect this generations-old treasure of theirs from thieves. Ever since Lydia's bluff had managed to gain some extra time from the Danes, Nico had been working to try to learn their secret. However, it seemed that he hadn't made any progress either. I say we run for it. The gardener didn't seem too averse to being buried with the roses. She even told you not to go back there. You aren't under any obligation to concern yourself with the Countess's whereabouts either. Lydia turned her gaze toward the sky and didn't respond. Did you just stick your head into the fountain or something? Nico asked. She sighed. No. The Danes aren't going to be in there, silly. The fairy cat chuckled to himself. He was utterly failing to read Lydia's emotional state. Ah, here comes the Earl. With a start, the fairy doctor looked up to find Edgar standing before her. He took the opportunity to come even closer as she was jumping to her feet. Though she tried to take a step back, the fountain blocked her way. His arms came around her back to support her before she could lose her balance completely. At last, we can be alone, he said. I suppose I don't count. Nico huffed and dropped his chin to his paw. I wonder if you might be kind enough to make yourself scarce, Edgar said with just a hint of irritation in his tone. It would be my pleasure. Do try not to fall out, won't you? With that, the inconsiderate fairy cat left them to it. The Earl pulled Lydia closer, scrutinizing her with his ash-mauve gaze. Why have you been avoiding me? I haven't, she lied. I've just been busy. I want you to be truthful with me, Lydia. While relieved that it seemed like Raven hadn't reported her fracas with Lucinda to his master, that fact only made it all the more difficult for her to explain. She didn't want Edgar to know about the harassment she was suffering. The nasty rumors, Lucinda's bullying and scorn. It was all a result of her own cowardice, and that was something she would rather keep from him. Growing up, most of Lydia's time had been spent with fairies, and she had always struggled with human relationships. If she was to marry Edgar, however, she would have to learn how to get along with other people. She would be expected to navigate the ladies and gentlemen of the upper classes, and she didn't want to give her fiancé the impression that she was incapable of doing so. I've been busy. That's truly all it is. Squirming, Lydia managed to free herself from Edgar's grasp. It would spell disaster if someone were to see them there together. The servants were all under the impression that Lucinda and Edgar were betrothed, and the gossip would only get more biting if Lydia was seen to be seducing him. I intend to remain here and keep watch over you for as long as you insist on staying. I cannot do that whilst you avoid me. There is no need for that. The thief was after her ladyship's jewelry. There is no reason that a servant should come to harm. That is just one of my concerns. Another is that you are undertaking work that you are unused to. If there is anything that is causing you trouble or anxiety, anything at all, I want you to tell me. Well, I'll have you know that I've nothing to tell you. You are only here because I asked a favor of the Duchess. I would despair were it to create a rift between us. Edgar, someone's coming. Lydia took another hurried step away from him as footsteps sounded from the other side of the shrubbery. It was Billy who eventually made an appearance. She had to wonder why they constantly seemed to be running into each other. Fancy seeing you here. Edgar echoed Lydia's thoughts. However, his tone was incredibly icy. Hello, Billy replied curtly, clearly aware that the Earl did not want him there. I was under the impression that footmen tended to have duties. Perhaps I have been misinformed. I was looking for Lydia. He smiled at her before holding up a small paper package. The cook gave me some slightly burnt cookies. I'm not one for sweet things, though. Are you sure I can have them? To her empty stomach, it was like a gift from heaven. But when Billy stepped forward to hand them over, Edgar stuck out his leg. The footman let out a cry, pitched forward, stumbled, and ended up in the shrubbery. The cookies fell from his grip, the package unraveled, and the contents ended up scattered over the ground. What was that for? He exclaimed. I thought you would have your guard up. Billy goggled at him. My profession does not require such developed reflexes. Your lordship's servant seems to be an exception. He indignantly started brushing the leaves from his jacket. And yet you seem unusually capable for a footman. Ah, I know. The next time I have a guest I don't care for, I shall have you wait on us during supper. Seems to me it would be better not to invite such a guest in the first place. There are certain people to whom I wish to serve poison, Edgar clarified. I'm not going to be complicit in that. While the men glared at each other, Lydia lifted the paper package from where it had caught on the bush. There wasn't a single cookie left inside. She suddenly felt all the more hungry for the promise of food having been snatched away from her. And now she was growing irritated. This is all Edgar's fault. She marched up to him. Look what you did. You wasted all those cookies. You never learn. You always act according to your own interests without understanding my feelings in the slightest. I wish you would stop seeing any gentleman who acts with the slightest hint of kindness as an enemy. It's abhorrent. Tears pooling in her eyes, Lydia turned on her heel and rushed away, leaving Edgar and Billy stunned. The night was wearing on, and the moonlight was spreading its sheen over the estate's roof. Nico plodded along atop it until he reached a skylight at its very edge, where he slipped through into an attic room. This was where Lydia slept, and it utterly failed to impress him. Not only was it too cramped, but there wasn't so much as a sofa or a cushion for him to rest on. Nevertheless, he had come back here to retire for the night. Lydia was curled up and fast asleep. Nico ensconced himself in the corner of the bed and helped himself to some of the blanket. He and Lydia used to share a bed when she was a child, but she had a frightful tendency to toss and turn, and the bigger she'd grown, the more liable she'd been to kick him onto the floor. He had eventually grown indignant and refused to sleep with her any longer. This night in particular, however, he was rather concerned about her. She had seemed a little weary during the day. He could well imagine how difficult it must have been to juggle her duties with an investigation into fairy secrets. She had a bad habit of taking on too much, and it worried him to no end. He had thought his responsibility to look after her would have ended now that she was engaged, but she was continuing to take on burdens by herself. It seemed that despite her love for the Earl and her promise to marry him, she would continue to keep her heart partially closed before him. Pest, Lydia. Are you crying? Nico whispered. He had thought that she was asleep until he noticed the almost imperceptible trembling of her shoulders. But she didn't respond, or even so much as twitch. Perhaps she was asleep after all. Nico went to peer at her, but she had the blanket right up over her head, and there was nothing to be gleaned. He tried scooping up some of the russet hair that had fallen on the sheets, giving it a couple of gentle tugs. There was still no response. However, he noticed that the hair was a little moist. Why? He didn't expect that she had stuck her head in the fountain again. Nico was at a loss. It seemed Lydia would keep crying despite his efforts to console her. And he knew she would, because she was just like her mother. From now on, there would only be one person capable of clearing the clouds from her heart. There were 4 servants hired at the same time as Billy, himself included. As for other outsiders, there are a number of labourers who have come to transplant trees in the garden, but they sleep in a cabin away from the estate and would have been unlikely to enter it. Edgar was spending his morning listening to Raven's report. Meanwhile, Lydia's outburst troubled him, and he had been wondering about its cause ever since it had happened. Had she really been that eager to eat those cast-off cookies? Enough to denounce him as abhorrent? Billy's 3 contemporaries are not footmen like him, but it does seem the 4 of them were acquainted before their arrival. It would appear that they have been keeping in frequent contact ever since that night. That is, since Lady Ortred went missing. Lydia had seemed utterly delighted when Billy had offered them to her too. They have also been making inquiries of the maids who have served here for a long time, asking about the regard necklace. It is unclear whether they are asking in earnest or if they see this mystery as an interesting pastime. Edgar had never seen her look so happy to receive a gift from him. He would very much like to send Billy to an early grave. Lord Ashenbert. I'm sorry. Oh, of course. Her ladyship's missing regard necklace. It was the key to the door behind which she keeps all her other jewelry, yes? When Lady Ortred was actively participating in upper-class society, she was known for her collection of jewelry. If that vast array of gems was hidden behind that door, then anyone who sought them would naturally begin by targeting the regard necklace. I would think it prudent not to discount the possibility that Billy and his 3 contemporaries, and perhaps a number of others, make up a group of thieves. However, I have yet to find any concrete evidence of that. I do find it unnatural that Billy, as a footman, was in the vicinity of her ladyship's chamber that evening. It creates the possibility that he was the thief, escaping through the window and traversing the roof to re-enter the estate through a different window. That, or he was standing watch for his dark-haired female accomplice. Supposing Billy was guilty, it would explain his tendency to loiter in Lydia's vicinity. She might have been a new hire, but she was responsible for tending to Lady Orchard's needs. Perhaps he thought she might hold information about the Countess's jewels. For the time being, can I ask you to keep your wits about you to ensure that Lydia doesn't come to any harm, Raven? Yes, my lord. At this time of day, she normally accompanies Mrs. Boyle in her work, but I shall keep her in my sights whenever she is likely to be alone. Please do. It was all Edgar could do. Lydia inevitably fled whenever she caught sight of him. He had the impression that she didn't want him to see her working as a maid. Not to mention she might have started doubting him again, what with all this nonsense relating to Lucinda. The result was that she was avoiding him. He lamented too that she did not appear to be jealous. Though she claimed to trust him, he wouldn't be able to bear it should it transpire that her feelings for him had waned. Before Edgar's spirits could truly sink, he was interrupted by a yowl. Oi, Earl, I'm in a fix, and I need your help. Nico had rushed into the room. Edgar waved a dismissive hand. Ask me again later. Lydia cried the whole night through. You have to do something. What? She's been down for a while now. I'm sure something must have happened. She's never cried over her work as a fairy doctor, no matter how tough it's gotten. She's been working hard to look for the Countess too, pestering me about it every half second. You haven't been doing anything to upset her, have you? I wouldn't. Because if so, you have to apologize. Tell her you'll be faithful from now on. I will thank you not to make assumptions about my loyalty to her. Why is she so upset, then? If I may, Raven spoke up tentatively. It was highly unusual for him to do so. Please forgive me for not mentioning this earlier, my lord, but Miss Carlton asked me to keep my silence. He went on to explain how Lucinda had grown envious of Lydia, subjecting her to all sorts out of spite, including the spreading of nasty rumors. It seemed that was part of the reason that the fairy doctor was avoiding Edgar. Yesterday, I saw her discarding a piece of bread covered in dirt. I believe it was done by the maids responsible for setting the table. The Earl leaped to his feet. Does that mean that she isn't eating properly? That was the only incident I witnessed. You should have told me about this sooner, Raven. Forgive me, my lord. I found myself in a bit of a quandary. And yet he had chosen to honor Lydia's request and keep his silence. Previously, he had been content to follow Edgar's orders alone. However, he was now beginning to respect what the fairy doctor asked of him as well. It represented a leap of progress for Raven, who never even saw humanity in anyone other than his master. You aren't at fault, Edgar said. He was the one who needed to take responsibility. He had been preoccupied with the thought of Lydia finding herself in danger. And yet it was not the jewelry thief who was harming her, but a series of spiteful pranks. She wasn't really a maid. She was just experiencing what it was like to be one as part of Lady Orchard's education. However, the Countess's absence left no one with knowledge of Lydia's true station to defend her. There was no one apart from Edgar who knew that her poor treatment at the hands of others was totally unjustified. It is my fault after all, Nico. I made Billy drop those cookies right in front of her. It offended me that she would be so delighted to take treats from another man. Oh, yes. She had so been looking forward to those. Indeed, and she stormed off in a raging temper. Whatever will you do now, Earl? Slights involving food are the least easily forgiven. Perhaps in your case, Nico. In Lydia's case too, I'm sure. Your thoughts, Raven? I would bear such a grudge till the day I died, my lord. His servant's most earnest opinion sent Edgar's spirits plummeting. However, this was no time to let low spirits stop him. He strode from the room, determined to convince Lydia to drop the pretense of being a maid at once. Unfortunately, that was when he spotted a plump man marching down the corridor toward him. The timing could not have been any worse. Although Constable had been talking about leaving with Lucinda in tow, he had yet to fulfill that promise. His daughter's reluctance to go was an obvious factor, but Edgar had to wonder if the man himself had an ulterior motive for staying, one that superseded his dislike for the younger Earl. It was common knowledge among London's elite that Lucinda had a private tutor. She must have had suitors who thought too highly of themselves and those who daren't approach her in equal measure. Perhaps Constable even considered the fake Lord Ashenbert's involvement a welcome change of pace, enough that he still wanted Edgar to take responsibility despite the contempt he suffered. All things considered, Edgar was less than pleased when the older Earl stopped before him. Ashenbert, I hear you are acquainted with my sister's handmaid. He was of course referring to Lydia. She is quite the scoundrel, he went on. She pilfered my Lucinda's brooch. She is not of a character capable of such an act. Feign ignorance if you will, Ashenbert, but as her acquaintance, I hope you will find it within you to advise her to return the brooch at once. I have to wonder why your daughter has made this false change against her. False charge, you say? The maid in question was aware that Lucinda was keeping a certain ivory jewelry box under her bed. Was that his sole piece of evidence? Edgar was exasperated, but Constable held fast to his indignation and rattled on. We shall be searching that maid's room, and we would like you to be there as a witness. It seemed this was the reason Constable had come looking for him. Lucinda was hoping to humiliate Lydia in front of Edgar. The Earl immediately called for Raven. After whispering briefly into his ear, Edgar set off with Constable. Naturally, he had no intention of allowing Lucinda's plan to unfold according to her whims. There was no evidence and therefore no reason to be searching Lydia's room. Had Lady Ortred been present, she would have almost certainly put a stop to this as the fairy doctor's temporary guardian. Unfortunately, in her absence the decision came down to the housekeeper. Edgar had entrusted Lydia to Lady Ortred's care because he trusted the Countess. He had not entrusted her to the housekeeper. He should have recognized the position she had been placed in at once, even if it had come totally unexpectedly. He had every intention of obstructing the search of Lydia's belongings. With the Countess gone, responsibility for her fell to him. And he was not prepared to sit back and let his fiancée be insulted. At the top of the servants' stairway was the attic room where Lydia was sleeping. She and Lucinda were waiting in front of it. With them were the housekeeper and butler. Father. Lucinda clung to Constable, wiping tears from her eyes. You brought me that wonderful brooch from Venice. Don't worry. I'm sure we will find it before too long. Though Lydia's face was pale, her posture was straight and resolute. However, she wasn't so much as glancing in Edgar's direction. Perhaps he had expected a pleading look for help. Her behavior, as though the pair weren't acquainted in the slightest, hurt. It was as if she was refusing to rely on him. Edgar was the reason she had come to stay at Lady Ortred's estate in the first place. Perhaps Lydia blamed him for Lucinda's envy, and she may well have been holding on to a grudge regarding the cookies too. Either way, she had built a wall between them. Edgar struggled back against it, going over to stand by her side. I ask that you cease this at once, he began. Not only have you accused her without any evidence, but you would go so far as to dig through her room. Is that any way to treat an innocent lady? We shall see how innocent she is after our search, replied Constable. There is no shortage of servants who are light-fingered. It is best to investigate these things as soon as possible. I shan't allow you to carry on like this, Lord Constable, for she is. It's all right, Lydia interrupted firmly. I shall allow my room to be searched as thoroughly as is necessary. While I appreciate your lordship's support, it alone cannot clear my name. At that, Edgar had no choice but to fall silent. Quite apart from anything else, He couldn't recall her referring to him as your lordship for the entirety of the time they'd known each other. He now had to suppress a mass of irritation and disappointment mixed with the urge to forcibly remove her from the situation. Lucinda's brooch did not make an appearance. Though Lydia seemed relieved, Edgar doubted this would lead anyone to trust her. Lucinda was adamant that the brooch should have been there and was presently reproving the housekeeper and butler for not looking properly. Constable was busy consoling her and showed no indication that he was planning to apologize to Lydia. The fairy doctor was still refusing to look at Edgar, withholding from him the opportunity to speak to her. It was as she was leaving after the housekeeper that he quickly grabbed her arm. She turned to him, seeming more frightened than angry. It was as though he had been one of the parties suspecting her of theft, and the idea of it panicked him. What had started as a small disagreement had ended up with her distancing herself from him by a considerable amount. "Let me talk to you," he pleaded, at the end of his tether. "Later." "When?" "You must tell me an exact time. Otherwise my hand will be forced." Lydia knew what he was capable of, and it seemed to do the trick. She gave him the time she would be finished with work. In truth, Edgar didn't want to let her go. However, he was left with no choice when the housekeeper called from downstairs. Edgar went outside, at which point he was approached by Raven. The servant opened a hand before him. In it was a brick-red cameo brooch. It was in Miss Carlton's attic room. "I see. Thank goodness you found it in time." "I witnessed Miss Lucinda's maid leaving the room covertly. No surprises there." "If you wouldn't mind, my lord," Raven beckoned him farther down the covered walkway. He concealed himself behind a pillar, then pointed beyond a thick growth of shrubs in the courtyard. There was a voice coming from the other side. The bright colors of a stylish dress were just visible between the leaves. There stood Lucinda and her handmaid. "What happened, Annie? Are you certain you placed the brooch in Lydia's room?" It seemed the maid was nodding. "Well, it wasn't there. If you've stashed it away somewhere, you had better give it back." There was a pause. "You can't tell me you don't have it." The maid was now desperately shaking her head. Lucinda continued to disparage Annie for some time until, after the loud slap of her striking the girl across the face, her voice grew silent. She must have gone. Her maid was left rooted to the spot. It was as if she were waiting for her mistress to vanish from her sight completely. And then she opened her mouth like she could no longer bear to keep it closed. "Foolish wench. I'll make sure she comes to regret holding me in contempt." Edgar had not misheard. The seemingly silent maid had spoken. Lydia had promised she would speak with Edgar once her work was done. However, there was no guarantee that she would be finished on time. Nevertheless, he appeared before her at the time she had given him, on the dot. It just so happened that she had been given an extra task that day and was washing dishes at the well behind the kitchen. "I couldn't bear to wait any longer," Edgar said. "I still have yet to wash all of this. It might take me a while. Sorry." Beside the well was a pile comprising a large barrel and several sizable pots and casks. The kitchen itself was dark, and the other servants had all retired to their rooms. Lydia was working only by the light of a small lamp, which she pushed away from her slightly so that Edgar could not see her squatting form clearly. "Isn't this a task that ought to be done by the scullery maids?" the Earl asked. It was, but it was also Lydia's punishment for that morning's brouhaha surrounding the brooch. She was not the thief, but Lucinda had demanded she be punished anyway, so it had been done. Knowing that someone must have stolen it, the noble girl declared that she would have liked to strip every last maid of her belongings. However, since she suspected Lydia, she had promised Mrs. Boyle that she would push the matter no further as long as the fairy doctor faced punishment. "It is a task that cannot be left undone," Lydia replied. She stood up to draw more water, hiding her bruised knuckles from the astute Edgar. They had been caned to correct her light fingers. He seemed to see everything she would rather he didn't. Just this morning, he had witnessed her being treated like a petty thief. Although he had tried to defend her, she had been loath to let him announce that the wretched girl at the center of everyone's suspicion was in fact his fiancée. It was why she hadn't been able to bear looking at his face. Had their eyes met, everything she had been trying to suppress might have spilled over, and she would have ended up throwing herself into his arms. The same sentiment was continuing to plague her now, leaving her unable to look at him still. And she was exhausted. Though Lydia only staggered slightly, she was immediately caught by a pair of arms from behind. Those limbs tightened, and the warmth from his body made her heart thunder and her body freeze. "Please stop putting yourself under so much undue stress." "I'm fine," she stammered. "I'm not." An unusually fierce, passionate kiss landed on the back of her neck. When she hoarsely asked that he stop, he refused in a whisper. "Are you under the impression that you may treat me as you like because I am a maid?" Lydia asked. Edgar relaxed his grip on her and sighed. "You are not a maid. As things stand, and at this estate, I am. Could you not rest, even just for a moment? I know you are tired." With that, Edgar led her to sit down on the barrel like a true gentleman would. Taking the scrubbing brush from her hand, he replaced it with something wrapped in a handkerchief. Inside was a cookie with a buttery fragrance. "Have you lost your faith in me, Lydia? Are you referring to yesterday's incident with the cookies? Because I wasn't quite myself. If you say that you haven't, I would like you to look me in the eye." He leaned toward her. True to recent form, she averted her gaze slightly. "Haven't you lost faith in me?" She asked the question that had been plaguing her for so long. "I have nothing to offer you. All I have to my name is my betrothal to you. It has all been made very clear since I've come here." Lydia was a commoner. As such, no one thought it strange to see her among the maids. Everyone believed Lucinda when she said that she was Edgar's fiancée, but no one would believe Lydia if she claimed the same. She doubted she would be able to become the countess that Edgar envisioned. "I have nothing either," he said, "other than a charming fiancée. Neither my name nor my title are genuine. It is because you have been supporting me, a man worth nothing, that I have come to think of you as irreplaceable." His words made her endlessly happy, and yet Lydia didn't know why she struggled to delight in them completely. Rather than having lost faith in Edgar, perhaps she had really lost faith in herself. As much as she wanted to give things her best, all her efforts proved fruitless. Edgar got to his feet. Lydia watched him cautiously, afraid that he would leave now that it was clear she couldn't look him in the eye. Instead, he removed his jacket and hung it on a nearby tree, then began to use the brush he'd taken from her to scrub a cask. "Don't do that, Edgar." "Why shouldn't I? I shall be finished by the time your break is over." "You can't." "I'm sure I can do a better job at it than you." He smiled at her, lifting up one of the larger pots with ease. She had struggled with that one. He then splashed it with water, seemingly unconcerned about wetting his perfectly polished shoes or well-starched shirt. "I once did this to earn some pocket money." No wonder he seemed so used to it. Although Edgar was born into a noble home, his parents had been killed and he'd been kidnapped and taken to America. He had escaped his captors on his own strength and fought for survival in the slums. What Lydia was going through now couldn't compare to how the Earl had suffered during his early life. "I dare say I wouldn't mind working long days as a farmhand if that was what it took to be with you." Edgar's slender frame lent itself to his air of nobility. But now Lydia could see the surprising broadness of his back, his sturdy shoulders, and the supple muscle of his arms. He was perhaps more masculine in physicality than she had given him credit for, and she wasn't sure what she felt as she struggled to take her eyes from him. If only he hadn't been a nobleman, perhaps she would have felt less reticent and more comfortable being his fiancée. But no matter what he did and how quietly avid he was in his work, she could all but guarantee that his mind would whir. He would be scheming how he might rise in society or strike it rich overnight. After all, the reality was that he had become rich and even wrested a new title for himself. "No one would mistake you for a farmhand even if you were to till the fields, Edgar." It was those tendencies of his that had allowed him to return to noble society. As Lydia watched him, she realized that everyone had an environment that suited them best. "It is for precisely the same reason that no one suspects I am your fiancé." Edgar paused in his work and looked back at her in surprise. You and I are to be married. That is a truth that exists between us, and it is neither here nor there whether anyone else believes it. A truth, is it? I find myself doubting it sometimes, for it has become clear to me that I was woefully uninformed when it came to the subject of marriage. When he had proposed to her, Lydia had read into it no further than that he was asking her to stay by his side forever, and she had graciously accepted. She had failed to take stock of the reality of it, that it meant becoming a countess. She stood up, unwilling to allow Edgar to do everything by himself, and started dragging away the pot he had finished cleaning to get it out of his way. You sit back down and don't worry about that. I have had enough of a break. The ground is uneven there. Lydia let out a cry as she fell, having failed to notice the bump beneath her feet. What on earth am I doing? I cannot even adequately carry out the duties I have been assigned. Rather than the pain in her foot, it was a devastating exhaustion that prevented her from standing immediately. Edgar had rushed over in shock. He picked her up and sat her on the stone wall surrounding the shrubbery. Did you sprain your ankle? Of course not, Lydia replied quickly. Edgar was kneeling in front of her and it had sent her into a panic when he had touched her ankle. Well, you've certainly grazed it slightly. He looked up at her, and their eyes met. His gaze held just a touch of anger to it, and she suddenly felt frightened. Perhaps her helplessness really was beginning to irritate him. I'm sorry, she said. Why are you apologizing? Because I am completely unfit for noble society. It shouldn't be too late to annul our engagement. Lydia's fear had yet to abate. Nerves pulsed through her body, and she regretted her words the moment they came out of her mouth. What if Edgar really was disappointed or exasperated with her? What if he jumped at the chance to call off their engagement? She didn't want to bear witness to his reaction. While he didn't respond in any of the ways she had feared, he did look angry as he gazed back at her. And then, quite suddenly, he slid his hand further up her leg. He pushed up the hem of her skirts, revealing the pale legs that were supposed to be kept hidden from others. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. His warm palms spread themselves over her knees, which was where they came to rest. A man was touching her legs, her drawers, and she was so horrified that she couldn't make a sound. She simply froze. Edgar was staring up at her intently. What are you thinking about presently? That you might flee from me. That, in truth, you do not need me. Or that I am too inept to support you through your suffering. His gaze downcast, he planted a kiss on the fabric over her thighs. Then he muttered, his voice taut, do you find my touch unpleasant and nothing more? Though I kiss and touch you, your feelings when I do so continue to elude me. I am always wanting more of you. Do you not feel the same about me? Everything burned. His words, his touch, the gaze that had found her face again. Though that same heat smoldered within Lydia, she struggled to give herself over to it completely. It was all she could do just to take another breath. Edgar hesitated. It isn't as though you must feel the same way. I do not wish to lose you. That is all I mean to say. With that, he gently removed his hands from her.